There is something kind of refreshing about a budget phone from a company that doesn't have a bunch of more expensive phones in their lineup to protect. So this is the new Nothing Phone 3A, which starts at $379, and the Phone 3A Pro, which is $459. The naming is a bit confusing, but all you really need to know is both of these phones do a shockingly good job of feeling like $1,000 flagship phones, with just a few small asterisks. The Pro phone, for those wondering, is basically the same as the 3A, but just with a better camera system. We'll get to that in a minute. But I feel like I have no choice but to start with the way this phone looks, because there's still nothing that looks quite like a Nothing phone, and that is still true. I mean, look at this blue. This blue is sick. It's still got the split design with the glyphs at the top around the cameras, but they've tweaked a few things too. They've moved some screws around, changed up some of the shapes and the details. I think this is fire, to be honest. Still got that little red square too. The 3A Pro is similar, but basically a monochrome version, and then with a way bigger camera cliff, like a camera plateau. Now, some people were already ragging on the camera design because it already leaked everywhere, so we've seen it. And to be fair, it's definitely unconventional and not symmetrical at all, but I still think it's nice. The gigantic bump even becomes a nice place to rest my index finger when I'm holding the phone. So if the goal is still to be the budget phone with an interesting aesthetic or to just be a unique looking phone in general, I think mission accomplished. Like, find me a more interesting phone design out there right now. I'll wait. Exactly. So once it comes to using this phone, like I said, it is impressive how close this $379 phone gets to feeling like $1,000 flagship. Like, I feel like I can see a lot of Nothing's growing maturity here too. They're a little bit bigger of a company now. They can afford to get more premium parts and from better suppliers, and it's paying off with a bunch of little improvements that stack up to feel really nice. Like this Phone 3A has a glass back now instead of the plastic from before. It's also now IP64 rated instead of IP54. It even has a much brighter AMOLED display now that gets up to 800 nits normally, but up to 3,000 nits peak for HDR, which is one of the highest numbers I've ever seen on paper. But forget the numbers though. This just, like I said, feels like a flagship. It's an enormous phone, first of all, even bigger again than the 2A. It's now a 6.77-inch jumbo-sized display with even bezels all the way around. It's a high refresh rate. It just feels like other flagships do. Now, yes, it's not quite as bright as the actual Ultra phones, and yes, the optical fingerprint reader under the display is a little slow sometimes, but those are small prices to pay when you're reminded of, well, the price you're paying. And then they are back to a Qualcomm chip again on this phone from a MediaTek chip last generation. So it is a Snapdragon 7S Gen 3 chip with 12 gigs of RAM. Now, some budget phones are trying to be the spec monster on paper for the price. This phone's not trying to do that. It is a lot of RAM, but that's not what this is. I think this is an appropriate mid-range chip for this phone, especially because whatever they're doing with their software is super impressive, and it really elevates the value of the thing. Like, this budget phone feels as quick and smooth most of the time as the spec monsters. So hey, shout out specifically to Nothing's software team. This is running Nothing OS 3.1 on top of Android 15. They do up to 6 years of software updates with these phones, and so many things, like these little animations, things like swiping down the notification bar or expanding a folder from the home screen, or even swiping between recent apps. So many of these little animations have been optimized to feel super smooth every time, and you can feel it. Now, it's not immune to hiccups. Like, you sometimes feel the mask slip off a little bit, and you're moving through some heavy apps or you're gaming for a while. And the stuff that's stressful on the GPU, you can absolutely find a way to get this phone stuttering a little bit, but I cannot be mad at the performance of this phone. Despite it not being a spec monster, it is so smooth. And I like a lot of features they've been adding to Nothing OS too. The lock screen customization is yet another one that's taken obviously a big cue from iOS, but you can see now you can long press and dive in and mess with the clock and drop in a few widgets on your lock screen if you want to. So the software is great. But you might be wondering about AI, because I don't know if you've noticed, but Nothing is one of the last big name smartphone companies that isn't heavily pushing a ton of AI stuff in their new phones. They don't have an AI image generator. They don't have a whole bunch of writing tools or AI summaries for notifications or Genmoji or anything like that. There is no object removal from photos, nothing. But there is one really interesting big new AI feature. So you see this here, they've added a single button to the side of the phone. It's actually a different shape than the other buttons. It's kind of dome shaped instead of flat, and it's right under the power button, so it's super reachable and you can't miss it. This is the AI button. If you double press it, it opens up the essential space, and this is an entire separate area of the phone just focused on making the AI helpful to the user. So here's what that means. Basically, you just save a bunch of stuff in here in the form of screenshots, and you can always come back here for referencing this stuff or finding information from the screenshots or even setting reminders about that stuff. So kind of think of it like the Pixel Screenshots app, but on steroids. So from anywhere you want on the phone, you can press that button once and it'll capture whatever's on your screen and save it. But then if you hold down that button, it will also start a voice recording that gets attached to that screenshot. So you can say something you want to remember, like, "This is the lawnmower Andrew told me about," or "Remind me to buy tickets to this concert tomorrow." And then that recording gets transcribed and summarized, and it will even detect and set actual reminders for you to do stuff with that information at a later date. I think that's an awesome start to something that could be really cool someday. It's still kind of being built out. I have this personal rule where I won't dump my life into something if it's not multi-platform. And this isn't, it's just on this phone, so there's no web version of this. I can't access this on my computer or a tablet or anything else like that. So I'm not gonna dive all in on something like this, but maybe someday in the future, could be cool. Or I could just ignore it completely and pretend it doesn't exist. You could too, although I will say you are going to press this button accidentally a whole bunch of times. Now, both the 3A and 3A Pro have the same 5,000 milliamp hour battery and excellent battery life. Both have 50-watt charging now, which is a little faster than last year, but basically that's 0 to 100 in an hour. And they are both still missing wireless charging. So that's one of the stings that, for me, someone who's used to wireless charging on a bunch of phones, that's a tougher trade-off, but this is one of the things that they've decided to stick with for nothing phones, although it is still pretty fast wired charging, so at least you have that. So the only difference you really need to know about is the cameras. The 3A Pro is the one theoretically you should want if you care more about cameras, and if you don't, then the 3A should be fine for you. That's on paper anyway. So I shot a bunch with the 3A and the 3A Pro cameras, and what was interesting is I didn't find a whole lot of difference in most situations between the primary cameras on these phones. Even though the sensor on the Pro is slightly bigger, they're both 50 megapixels, but the Pro has a little bit better autofocus. In general, the pictures from both of them are passable. You know, the sensor is big enough to get you a soft background for close-up subjects. The colors aren't too overprocessed, although you might get some fringing and overexposure, but generally they're pretty decent looking photos. The 8 megapixel ultra-wides are also identical, which is to say pretty meh. But the 3x periscope telephoto lens on the Pro definitely gives you a more usable far range and macros than the 2x on the 3A. So I love a good periscope zoom. I just think I was expecting to notice more of a difference between these two, given how dramatic of a difference this huge camera table makes. But it's not actually that big of a difference from my experience, so the more you know. So here's my final thoughts on this Nothing phone refresh. First of all, as someone who just came from reviewing the iPhone 16e, this spec sheet on paper makes the iPhone 16e spec sheet on paper look terrible. This looks loaded. Obviously, it's triple cameras. It's a much bigger, brighter AMOLED display. It's high refresh rate. It's also a massive battery and great battery life, while you have 60 hertz and a smaller phone and, you know, a single camera on the 16e. And it's way cheaper. So just a lot of value here in general, which is what we expect from Nothing from the A series. But my other thought is I am now way more curious about Nothing Phone 3, like a genuine flagship from this company, because if they're able to make this for this value, I kind of wonder what a Snapdragon 8 Elite and a silicon carbide battery and maybe even wireless charging and a whole bunch more specs loaded into a phone like this could be, because they're so good at software already. I kind of hope we see something like that, hopefully soon. But speaking of soon, shout out to this video sponsor, Ridge, because they are running a 12-year anniversary sale right now that, depending on when you're watching this, could be over pretty soon. So link below. So for the sale now, you can get discounts up to 40% off 40% off on wallets, but also key cases and travel gear like luggage. It's all stuff that I've been using lately, so I can vouch for its quality. So head over to ridge.com and knock yourself out before it's too late. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.